Shalom, and welcome back to B'nai Noach Academy, Thoughts on the Torah. Please remember to hit the like button and to subscribe, and most importantly, to share this wisdom and inspiration with friends and family. If you look at the book of Exodus, chapter 21, and it begins, he says, "These are the rules that you shall set before them." That's before the children of Israel. And then it continues, and it says, "When you acquire a Hebrew slave, that person shall serve for 6 years." And then it goes on the details of how the master of this slave needs to support the slave, support even his family, and what the slave is obligated to the master, and what conditions that he would be set free, and when, and how. Well, the real question here is, chapter 21 comes in the heels, obviously, of chapter 20. That's where we are told all the details of how Hashem, that's God, delivered the Torah, revelation on Mount Sinai. And this comes immediately after that. In fact, it begins with the word "and." Okay, you won't see it in most English translations, but if you look at the Hebrew, it says "ve'ela," and these are the rules you shall place before. Meaning, and means that it is connected to what was said before. It is a continuum. The question is, God just delivered the most important thing in the world. He delivered the Torah to his people and through them to the entire world. This is the first order of business. There's nothing else to talk about. In fact, if we examine the story and the details of this rule of the Hebrew slave, we will come to a quick realization and a very, very swift conclusion that this is something of a very rare nature. It hardly ever happens, if it does. But it's certainly not a commonplace thing. Shouldn't God have told us things that are more commonplace? Things that are discussed later in this chapter seem to be more prevalent in our lives. Why is God discussing this now? Right here, right now, first order of business after giving us the Torah? The answer is, and I'll begin with something that is unfortunately very commonplace in our society, and that is every state, every city has what's called a Department of Corrections. And sadly, what it is the Bureau of Prisons. That's really the correct title that it should carry. Because unfortunately, and I can tell you this from firsthand experience of people that I've worked with, unfortunately, in most of the cases, if not all, there's absolutely no element of correction at all. If anything, as the old saying goes, if a criminal wants to learn how to become a better criminal, meaning he wants to learn real criminality, he should go to prison, because there he'll meet up with other criminals, and now he will be able to broaden his connections, his knowledge of criminality. So it isn't Department of Corrections. There's no real correctional redeeming quality about it. However, the Torah, gives us the proper approach to how to deal and in what manner to try to really rehabilitate, to correct the person who has committed crimes against society, who has done bad to others. Obviously, they themselves are in a very bad place. So here comes the very first order of business. The Torah is giving us almost like a general, all-encompassing approach, perspective on how to deal with people that cause harm to others, how to deal with people that bring pain onto others. And the Torah tells us, if you shall purchase a Hebrew slave, why would somebody be a slave if they're a Hebrew? Well, the answer is, according to the rules of the Torah, when one steals, one robs someone else, one needs to pay back. One needs to make that person whole. That's the only way, really, you can compensate for it. Just merely throwing a person into prison for having stolen, for having committed robbery, is not a solution according to the Torah. There is no such thing according to the Torah. Rather, if you stole from someone $100, you got to give them $100. You stole an item which is worth $100. If the item still exists, you have to return the item if it's intact. But if it's not intact, then you have to pay the person whole and pay them $100. What if you don't have the money? You can't pay. That's the case when you can get sold as a slave. In other words, you have to work it out. You have to work in order to compensate your victims. You have to work in order to produce that money to now make your victims back whole. And here comes the amazing quality of rehabilitation, of correction. It's obvious that even if a person is poor and destitute, but for them to go out there and steal from another person, it's obvious that there has to clearly be something wrong with them. Something is deficient in their soul. Something is deficient in their personality, in their being. Either they weren't treated right, or for whatever reason, they grew into this bad person. And here comes Hashem's way, God's way of rehabilitation. Get sold as a slave. You work for another person. But that person, the Torah gives them very, very restrictive rules as to how and in what manner they can treat you, how they're supposed to treat you. You, the slave, meaning the person who was sold as a slave. First of all, they have to be treated with benevolence. Second of all, their family's got to be taken care of. Third of all, just to give you an example, the Talmud spells out a very important detail. You cannot give this quote-unquote slave, the Hebrew slave, you cannot instruct them, force them to do any demeaning jobs. Now, what's a demeaning job? A demeaning job can it be something that has no quantitative end, meaning you say to him, go plow the field. No, that is the meaning, because you're basically saying to him, I just want to keep you busy, go plow the field, right? Go grind the mill. No, if you tell him, I need you to go plow, the field up until this point, or I need you to do this task. In other words, there's a purposefulness to it, then you can give it to him. Moreover, the Talmud says that if for some reason the master and his Hebrew slave are stuck somewhere, let's say they're out on the road, and for some reason they only have a minimal amount of bedding, let's say they only have one pillow and one blanket, well, the master is responsible for his Hebrew slave. He acquired him. He took responsibility for him. He has to give him, his slave, he has to give him his pillow, he has to give him his blanket, and he himself has to sleep without a pillow and a blanket. That's just an example. So the bottom line is, as the Talmud says, one who acquires a Hebrew slave for himself is really, in a sense, acquiring a master for himself, meaning a burden. You're not really getting much out of it. And if somebody came to me and asked me for business advice, does it make business sense to do it? I say, absolutely not. You're not going to really get the value of your dollar that you're paying for this slave. So why would you buy him? Because you're a benevolent person. You want to help someone. That is the element of rehabilitation. The Torah wants this person to spend 6 years in your home, working for you, that kind person. Yes, having responsibilities. Yes, having duties. You can't just sit around and just eat and sleep. You're a servant. You have to work it off. But at the same time, you're going to be treated with dignity and then with benevolence, and hopefully pick up from your environment, from these good people that bought you, that are employing you, and thus you're going to be rehabilitated. So this is the first order of business, because here the Torah is teaching us what is the proper approach to crime and punishment. Of course, just a caveat to everything I said, today's society, obviously there are people that are such a threat to society that the only benevolence is to get them off the streets. I am not arguing to, not making an argument to shut down all prisons and all jails. Obviously, there are those, hardened criminals or real psychopaths that need to be locked up. But I'm talking about the average person who has done some wrong. There is room and there are means for rehabilitation. It just has to be the correct ones. And that's the ones that the Torah is giving us.